Hello. Welcome to Better Conversations Live. I'm here with my guest and co-host, Glenn Martin.
Howdy.
Cool. So some things to just remind people of. We are going to be having a conversation about people today, very much front and center. So, but let me just take you through. So if you've got any comments and you're watching this live, please drop them in the chat and we'll pick those up and bring those into the conversation. And if you are watching the replay, then please also drop the comments below and we'll come back to and respond to those. We're here every... Do you want to do that?
Tuesday. Yeah, every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Got to be tuning in, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Better Conversations Live. Why would you miss it? Where else are you going to be?
I don't know why anyone would miss it in any continent, really. So yeah, those times, 8 a.m. East Coast, North America, 2 p.m. Central European Time, 5:30 Indian Standard Time, and 10 p.m. is Australia, East Coast. So today we're going to be talking about, Glenn is going to be talking about leadership and talent and creating great hiring experiences. Before we do get into it, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, Sehaam, you know I'm never very good at this, so...
Practice makes perfect, Glenn.
Exactly that. So I'm Glenn Martin. I think now I can officially call kind of recruitment and people a career because I've been in it for over 15 years. And I primarily now work with startups and scale-ups to essentially help them scale all of their functions, kind of UK, EMEA, APAC regions. And it's super cool. I love it. I mean, it's just such fun growing with a company and kind of helping them spend that investment, that Series A or Series B funded investment, on superstar hires. So yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell, I think.
Yeah, and let's not forget, there's you're working on a course at the moment. That's going to be about talent for leaders to understand how to get involved, how to make that whole experience better, right, for incoming people.
100%. Yeah, it's a super important kind of piece that I think leaders really need to understand. It's don't delegate or outsource that kind of strategic approach to how you bring, the people you want to hire and how you're going to bring them in and the experiences they're going to have. You need to be really completely immersed and involved in that and the kind of structure of it, how it's going to look and feel, because it needs to feel like an experience that comes from every part of the business. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm super excited about writing it. Should be available in September. That's the target. More news coming on that soon.
Yeah, brilliant. Really excited about that. And it's, a lot of the conversations that we have offline and so on are all about the involvement of leaders and how to think about things better. So yeah, this is going to be a fabulous one. And as you said, we'll share more about that in due course. If you want to be a guest on the show, bclive@betterconversations.co is the email to drop a line to, or what's the other way, Glenn?
Oh, hang on. Contact us directly.
Yes.
You completely put me on the spot now. I was like,
are you following? Yes. Reach out to any of the co-hosts, and they're listed on betterconversations.live. Find us on LinkedIn and so on, and you can contact me here on LinkedIn. Get in touch, and Glenn is on that handle. There's 3 N's. Just to be clear, 3 N's.
Exactly. Yeah, people often get that bit wrong. They're like,
yes,
I can't connect to it. I can't find you. It's like, yes. 3 N's, 3. I'm greedy. It's 3.
Cool. So, but we have an article, don't we? There was an article of interest to us this week, which is a McKinsey article on back to human, why HR leaders want to focus on people again.
Yeah.
Because it has been a kind of roller coaster change, everything new, responding to a crisis and so on. What grabbed you about this, Glenn?
Immediately the back to human. I mean, that was the piece that drew me in. I was like, okay, cool. What is this? Just kind of a piece where it's clickbait in the title, but actually the actual article itself is just more kind of standard kind of HR approach. But actually, it was interesting. It was a good one. I think there was a couple of pieces I pulled out, like how HR are looking to think and invest more deeply in employees. I think so. There was like 4 strategic kind of pillars to it. The second one, I think, was more around letting employees bring their whole person to work, which I thought, oh, that's interesting. I think that's possibly something that's already kind of happening to a degree. And then the third piece was around paving the way for the new possible. That bit was a little vague. I was like, it felt more like a statement piece without any real kind of actions below it. And then there was a piece around HR becoming human capitalists, which I really didn't like at all. It just sounded really bad. Yes. So I think it was those first 2 pieces where if you can really think intentionally about allowing people to bring their whole person to work, their whole self to work, that for me kind of fed into kind of almost like DEI, so like diversity, equity, inclusion. So I thought that was quite interesting. And then I was drawn to the fact that they were like, okay, cool. How are you going to invest more directly and deeply in your employees? And why should it just be your employees? Could it not be people that you want to bring into the business? And that in itself plays into my kind of, I guess I don't want to call it area of expertise, but the space that I've worked in for the last 15 years, let's put it that way.
Well,
so that's what drew me in.
Right. And we're going to get into a lot of that in the conversation today. Yeah, I found I thought it was interesting. There's definitely sort of just looking at my notes here, the levers that they were talking about was segmentation to try and meet the needs. I mean, there's a lot of jargon and terminology that's used on these things, which can be a little bit. It's a shorthand, but it can also become a little meaningless or jarring. Segmentation, so meeting the needs of people and the diversity of the people that they have. Inclusion, whole person to work. I always kind of have it, yes, but we still need some guidance about what that can look like, because not everyone has the same definition about bringing your whole self to work. Now that might sound a little limiting, and I'm happy to be challenged on that, but I think there's what we don't want to do is take away from the culture or the way of working with each other that kind of doesn't work for everyone. Purpose, really wanting their companies to have an impact on the world. So not just, the core business necessarily, but having a bigger, a real adding value, a sense that you're working for an employer that's actually contributing to positive things, I guess, on the planet.
It's an interesting one, that, I think, in terms of the mission piece, because let's be fair, the last 14 to 16 months, I would imagine some companies, the mission and vision have been counterbalanced with, can we stay functioning, opening and operating? So I wonder how the mission and the vision from the point of view of the employee has that remained consistent over the last, say, 16 months? If it hasn't, how are HR and the business going to kind of recalibrate that? So I thought that was a really interesting piece.
And whether it'll stay, whether it'll sustain. The other one that I thought was really interesting was helping people make faster and better decisions through a network of teams. I'm really curious as to how this actually kind of plays out. Because there's a tendency to put something in place with good intention, but end up over-engineering the process. trying to, I think there was an element of helping people, managers, in their interactions with people, and it's felt a little bit vague in there, but there's more of this report. It's the first in a series, I believe. There's more in the report. And then the other piece, the final lever, or management lever they talked about, was the right people. So having the right temperament and character, people who are curious and flexible and who can operate in uncertainty. Yes, and there may be people who don't have those traits, but they're still valuable people to have in your organization. So that's going to be more to see on that report, I think.
Definitely. I think the cynic in me kind of thinks or feels like I've heard the quick decision making, faster decisions, better outcomes kind of piece so many times before. I wonder how it's going to be different this time. And equally, the interesting piece for me there that you highlighted around having people with the right temperament. Okay, cool. How are you gonna assess for that in terms of a recruitment process? Is it going to be just like a subjective kind of view of, oh, they seem to be pretty relaxed and they've given me a couple of examples of how well they've performed under pressure? Or is it actually going to be stress test in some way? So there's a couple of pieces in there which I think sound familiar. And I'd be keen to kind of understand how in actual reality that might look, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's definitely a shift, hasn't there, towards, customization, understanding individuals better, allowing that to factor in and have weight to decision making. But I struggle to see how certainly larger organizations are going to be able to move away from data, and over reliance on data or applications or surveys that give you a picture to then act on. There's still a fundamental need to have people in leadership roles who know how to facilitate and have great conversations with their people. Full stop. And you can't replace that unless you want to shift your education system into where we actually start teaching people how to, work through the sort of knottier or difficult conversations, or employers make it a big thing to actually, every leader has to have a certain capability in having conversations with people. Because one of the stats in there was like 3/4 of employees say the most stressful thing is having conversations with their bosses.
Yeah, 100%. And that would have only been magnified over the last kind of 16 months or so. And to your point around kind of leadership, right? If you as a leader haven't really adapted your style to kind of encompass the kind of working environment that was, and you just kind of plowed ahead with a very similar, same style, you're missing a lot. You're missing a lot of opportunities for communication. You're missing a lot of opportunities to understand how your people are feeling about their work, the business. You as a leader, let's not forget, as a leader, you should always be looking for feedback, right? And if you're not getting feedback, that's the first kind of red flag for me. If you're getting no feedback from your team, first and foremost, have you set up the right kind of channels? Have you set the right context for your people to give you feedback? And secondly, you do need to ask for it as well. You can't be passive in that, in terms of kind of just sitting there thinking, well, they'll give me feedback, as and when they feel the time is right, or perhaps I'll get some feedback in a formal one-to-one. It's not really the right context sometimes. So I do think that kind of piece around communication is fundamental, right?
And it's harder right now with hybrid models and people working from home and so on. So yeah, definitely, I think that's it was challenging before. It's even harder now if you've got teams, and we can't just take the models of the way we met, whether it was accidentally or through a formal scheduled meeting, and put them in a sort of virtual setting. So yes,
it's interesting, isn't it? So I wonder how many leaders have actually sought out coaching to help them better communicate in a virtual environment?
I don't have any data on
No,
that.
no,
I'd
nor do I.
love to have it, but
Nor do I. But
my
it
gut
kind of begs the
feel,
question, right?
yeah, but my gut feel, in joining a number of virtual events, I've posed the question to the panelists, to leaders of great brand organizations, and asked them that very question. And, what comes back is a very mechanical, but there isn't talk about the depth of the conversation or the quality of the conversation. It's purely, we have check-ins, so I know what they're doing. And it's like, yeah, but you can't see them and you don't know how they're feeling. And especially if they're new hires, which has happened in a lot of organizations,
Yeah.
you've got even fewer touch points, even fewer points of data to read from. So, and so that question, people have just managed rather than actually thinking about a different way or an enhanced way of having these conversations, right?
And I bring that into the context of interviewing, right? All interviews have been virtual over the last 16 months, right? So how do you turn up to that interview? How do you engage? How do you set the context for that interview when you're not there in person? Are you thinking intentionally about your camera setup? Are you thinking about the kind of lighting? Are you thinking about what you're wearing? Are you thinking about how you open that interview? Eye contact. So people are taking notes. They're like this. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That sounds good. Yeah. And next question. How off-putting can that be to a kind of an interviewee if you're not really thinking about how you turn up for an interview? You could potentially be sending the wrong kind of cultural message, business message to those individuals. And you could be seriously missing out on an amazing hire. So
I agree, and I think, but that's it. It's the muddling through and the working with the setup. But if no one says to you, well, actually, you do need to rearrange your desk. You need to figure out a way that you can have better eye contact or seeming eye contact as an absolute minimum for making up for the fact that they're not in front of you and you can't see them. And it takes some getting used to, but I think it's valuable and important to do if you really want to make that connection with people.
Definitely.
So I wanted to ask you, get into your perspective, Glenn, about by putting this question to you. I think I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, do employers make hiring difficult for themselves?
So I think broadly, if you don't really invest in your kind of recruitment and hiring process, you're not going to get the results that you hope for. So it's kind of, the more you invest, the more you're present in it, the more you're intentional about what you do, the better the quality of hiring and the hiring process will be, and should result in a really great hire. I think if you are hands off, you see recruitment as a service, you outsource recruitment as a function, because actually what you just want is the end result. You're not worried about how somebody kind of gets to that kind of end result. You're going to significantly impact your ability to make great hires. And this comes into the sort of context of a leader's understanding of an employer brand versus a talent brand, right? And this links into your owning, right? You can own the employer brand because that's kind of push, right? So that's you kind of essentially investing money to promote your company and promote your place of work. You can control that piece. The piece you can't control but can have an influence on is the talent brand. And that is essentially the highly social element of how the talent market are talking about your brand. So it incorporates how they think, how they feel, and what they share about your organization. And that's across social media. So if you're prepared to completely outsource your talent brand, you'll get the results based on that, right? If you're prepared to really invest in your talent brand and really be present in social, really start to share those experiences, those stories, you're going to get positive results. Employer brand, you can control, push money into it, bang, you can create the message you want to send. The talent brand is the piece you need to own. And if you're outsourcing that as well, it's jeopardy. Basically, you're not giving the full value to the talent market in terms of what you can deliver. And equally, you don't have that holistic picture.
Well, I like that for a number of reasons. I think there's a missed opportunity, isn't there? Because you've got employers who, assuming you've got a great culture and they love their work and they love being there and belonging to your organization, they are really ready to share that. We all like to tell people about stuff that we're enjoying, right? The good time that we're having. And if you don't know how to tap into that, that's a missed opportunity, right? And it's, I mean, that's easy. But the other piece is, to your point about the individual, the candidate, is they want to make an emotional connection with their next job. They want to go somewhere and feel like, I can belong here. I can see that I fit here. It's like buying a house. I can see me living here. Right?
100%.
So, and I think that's the piece that sometimes employers see as a one-way transaction. And so why would I entrust my best ideas, my best thoughts, my enthusiasm with an employer that potentially isn't that interested in me?
Yeah. Big mistake some companies make. They want to get all this upfront kind of like testing and calibration of an individual before they're prepared to even engage with them. Right? Just think about this, right? If you kind of you go into you're going into a kind of a process that you peripherally you're interested in a company, you're kind of keen to learn a bit more, and before you can talk to anybody in the business, you've got to invest an hour of your time in some form of test. My question there to a company is always, what's the motivation for that individual to invest their time for free? What have you given them in return that would motivate them to want to invest their time in that kind of test? And this is thinking about that duality of it's an experience it's an assessment and experience for both parties, the employer that wants to hire and the individual that would like to secure that next career challenge. And so many of these things are classed as standard processes within kind of recruitment 101. And again, I generally think it impacts companies' ability to really attract and engage individuals that could just be amazing for their business.
It puts up a wall and a barrier, right? There's no, as you say, there's no motivation. You start from a point of stress rather than a point of, hey, what are you all about, and what's the opportunity for me, and how much should I put into my, my application here?
And it's a generational thing as well. I mean, I think perhaps generationally, from an employment market perspective, certain generations would expect that to happen. I think about the Gen Zers, they'll be like, spend an hour of my time on this for what? Why? Why would I do that? So not only are you kind of impacting a certain demographic of the talent market, you could be quite literally just excluding the next kind of generation of leaders of your business because you just haven't, you've applied a one-size-fits-all to your recruitment strategy and you haven't differentiated it in any way.
Because if that's my experience at this point, then the whole company is like this, surely, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I always think of it in the context of a kind of like my niece. I mean, she's coming up for like 18 this year, right? I can't imagine for a second if she went into a recruitment process and people asked her to do loads of stuff before she even could speak to somebody that she would be in the slightest bit interested. It's just kind of, and this is the thing that sometimes it's like, you've just got to put your human hat on, right? And think, how would I feel about this, or how would friends of mine or family members of mine feel about this process? Just try and humanize it a bit more, put some context in it, as opposed to, as we've discussed before, right? I mean, it's common language in recruitment, candidate, interviewee, et cetera. But I really still feel it dehumanizes the individual when you refer to them as a candidate. And then we get into sort of things like candidate pipeline and all this sort of thing.
Well, we become a commodity.
Yeah, I mean, you commoditize. You commoditize something that is human-based, is human-centric. There's no right balance. I don't think I've seen that, but you can be more, human-first about your approach to recruitment. So back to the article, back to human, for me, tick the box straight away. I was like, okay, cool. This sounds like it all could be a set of initiatives that could really, really win for everybody,
Well, and I think the other point of it is, if you've got a human touch or a person-to-person interaction to kick things off, you've got a better chance of understanding maybe what the needs of that individual are. And I just think about, some people will have a great deal of anxiety about completing some online assessment, and never get the opportunity to demonstrate what they can do, what they can bring, and so on, because they've got this initial thing, or just, high anxiety around that I think we underestimate.
Well, again, coming back to, one of our co-hosts, Ben, right? How many companies think about, okay, if we offer a test, does this test is it something that neurodiverse people can do? Is it set up in a way that allows them to kind of access this and do this? Are we thinking along the lines of, ADHD, right? So we're asking them to do a test for an hour and a half. Should we be breaking that down into segments? Should we, so again, it's really thinking about, and this is where you start to really expand and diversify your kind of talent pool, when you start to think more specifically around the human being that could be at the end of that interested in your company, And it's going to take a lot of effort. And it's not as easy as just, that one size fits all. But actually the net benefit for your company is massive, massive.
And just to be clear, we're not just talking about people whose job is responsibility for hiring. We're talking about everyone involved in the hiring process. So if you're hiring, 100%. if you're leading a team and you need a person and you're working with your hiring person, if you have them, it's your involvement in that process as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, be invested, be intentional, turn up, right? It's not a tick box exercise, that individual that's interviewing with you, each interaction with the business, they're building a picture of what they may decide in terms of wanting to join. So, really, really own it. Own your time as an interviewer. Really create an experience for that individual. What you want at the end of the process is, if business is interested, individuals interested, offer accepted, great. If it doesn't get to a point where the business decides to move forward, you want that individual walking away as an advocate. Like, you know what? Right. God, I really wanted that job, but I didn't get it. And they gave me some really great feedback as to why. And actually the whole experience was it was a real good learning process for me. I'd definitely apply again in 6 to 12 months or whatever. That's what you really want to be aiming for.
Which is, what proportion would you guess of employers kind of make a decision, not this person, and then nothing? There's nothing that follows after that. There's no kind of interaction, good or bad. There's just nothing.
So I would say definitely more than 50%.
Right.
Probably certainly more than 65%. Almost definitely more than 75%. I mean, it's in the majority more than the minority, yeah. Because you know what? It takes time afterwards, right? So the business has decided that's not the individual we want to progress to offer stage with. Okay, cool. The business, from their point of view, their kind of interest has kind of closed off there. So sometimes the inclination from recruitment is to be like, okay, cool, quick one-liner. Sorry you haven't been successful. All the best for the future. I don't think the majority of recruiters think I'm now going to invest 30 minutes of my time to give some really quality feedback to that individual, make sure that they're listened to, they're heard, just in terms of their feedback based on the decision, and then actually really think about how I could set up a kind of reconnection a bit further down the line. Because you may not want to hire that person today, but in 12 months' time, they could be absolutely the person you want to hire. And if they've had a really crappy experience previously, you are going to be at the bottom of their list of priorities.
Right.
Right. Pay it forward.
And we're not talking about every candidate that applies. We're talking about the candidates who've made it to the final set of interviews, right? Or
everybody deserves a response. Everybody deserves an acknowledgement of their application and some idea of how far their application's progressed. You've kind of got to manage your kind of time and kind of workload around that. But don't leave people hanging. If somebody's applied, acknowledge it. If they're good to go, move them forward. If they're not, thanks, but let's stay connected. And then at each stage, you're looking to give, kind of more quality feedback and engagement. It's important. And seriously, it's so important. It's important to that person. So why should it not be important to you?
Well, it's ensuring that it's part of your quality process, right? And that you part of your brand, as you say. That's how you treat people.
And your values, right? So many companies talk about values, right? Values don't stop just when you decided you're not interested in somebody. If you're saying that you're really kind of inclusive and you're great at communication or that sort of thing, well, that's only up until the point when you're no longer interested, and then communication is not a value that you're aligned to. That's always my thinking, And look, companies don't get it right all the time. I don't get it right all the time. But you know what? When I don't get it right, hands up, I'll apologize. And I'll make sure that, I give that person, sort of time to be heard and stuff,
It's valuable. In terms of, I just wondered if we could switch a little bit and talk about policies. And that was one of the things in the article was, our policies need to change and so on. Are we at risk of over-engineering our policies? Now that we're sort of reflecting on what works within our organizations?
So, when I kind of read that and you you were just reiterating that, my first thought was kind of the sort of DEI initiative, so diversity, equity, inclusion. And I get asked a lot, kind of what policies do the companies you work with use to really try and diversify the kind of talent that they're hiring. And I'm always there's some really good initiatives that you can start with. And initiatives more than policies. There are some policies you can put in, i.e. like actual metrics for the hiring team. So in terms of presenting quite diverse kind of shortlists to hiring managers for them to consider. So you can put some, hard kind of metrics in place to do that. And that's good. That's fine at the kind of recruitment side. But actually, when you actually come into the company, if that doesn't follow through, so i.e., great, we're hiring really diverse groups of individuals into our business, but actually there's no community within that company to make them feel like they belong. You're only fulfilling part of you're fulfilling the business need. You're not fulfilling the person's need. You're not thinking about them in terms of belonging. You're not thinking about them in terms of kind of opportunity, right? So I think, yes, there is a danger that you can go down that policy route and essentially over-engineer the policies to a point where you're getting so much good statistics at that kind of, recruitment side. So, drawing the talent in, but you're completely failing those people once they come into the business. So what are you going to do when they come into the business? And there was, it was back in so it really resonated with me. It was back in 2019. I will name check the lady as well. Her name's Rebecca Bastian. She's like CEO and co-founder of OwnTrail. And she was talking in this kind of Forbes article about, I think she called it, I wrote it down, she called it employee resource groups, but essentially it's kind of creating communities for the people that you're bringing into that, and that's not just kind of around kind of gender diversity or ethnic diversity. It's about creating communities for the types of people you're hiring into your business, so that they feel that sense of belonging, so they can bring their whole person to work. And actually, what you're doing, you're fulfilling more than just a kind of policy need and a business need. You're continuing to honour the person that you've hired, and actually really make them feel integrated into that business and environment. So yeah, it's 2019, and I'm sure we can stick it in a link and send it out. I thought it was an article that just kind of really resonated with me at the time, and I always check back to it. So yeah, it's a nice one.
Well, that would be great. Glenn, if we'll get that shared out. One of the things that we also touched on at the very beginning, and you just touched on now, is what are you measuring? Measuring the right stuff, useful data, and that's one side of it. The other side of it is how do you know that you've delivered? Because if you're not measuring the right data, you're not, and also I'll throw in there, quantitative data is tidier than qualitative data.
Of course, it is.
And how objective can you be when you're looking at qualitative data? So I just wonder what your thoughts are about metrics.
Well, first and foremost, measure what matters, right? That's the first golden rule. Measure what matters. So, you really need to, and this is not just a kind of recruitment decision. This is a business decision and recruitment decision, right? It's a partnership piece. So what is important to us? So what could be important is we would like more diversity, gender diversity in our engineering team. I mean, that's an often used example, right? So if that gender diversity is what's important, everything you measure needs to fulfill that fundamental target, and then your policies and your approach should be informed by really thinking about that kind of that key goal. I think that I don't want to call it the danger, but that there is a lot of data available and a growing amount of data available within the kind of recruitment space. I mean, analytics it just continues to grow as a kind of talking point and kind of key part of kind of how recruitment and certainly HR function now. I just wonder whether we've gone from kind of almost like this zero data kind of approach to almost, again, over engineering it. So we've got reports on everything now. It's kind of like, you can break down like the whole of a kind of hiring process to, minutes, hours, metrics, which I don't fundamentally think that's super important. It could be interesting, but I don't think it needs to form the basis of a weekly or bi-weekly report. I think that the key thing is, you start with who are the individuals that we would like to hire? When would we like to hire them? How are we going to attract and engage them? And then you start to put the kind of measurements in place and the metrics in place to track that. Because, just some of the ATSs now, you can just, generate loads of reports. Yeah. Reports all day long. Loads of them, and fundamentally, will those reports inform my approach to that initial kind of pre-screening conversation? No, they won't, because that's a human to human interaction. I think you have to find that kind of balance, and that's a discovery process, right? It's iterative. You might start off at a point of too much data, and then you test that, and you learn, and you come to a point where the calibration is right. Or you might start with hardly any data, and you realize you need to kind of really move towards, a good foundation of data. But I don't know, that it's you have to be prepared to be curious, test it, learn, and continually iterate. Don't think you can just get an off-the-shelf function and then just think that's us, that's our playbook. That makes
Or
sense.
that, yeah, absolutely. Or that you're driven by the functionality of whatever application you use, and that
Yeah.
determines your
Yeah.
approach or your process or your rollout or
Yeah.
the conversations that you're having or the decisions that are being made in those strategic meetings. Or right, so they're great, but yes, at the end of the day, you've got to look at your business, your team, and determine what's right.
Yeah.
For our team. I was having a
And
conversation with someone. I'm going to just jump in here with
no.
things like KPIs. And one of my clients was saying, well, you know, for what we do, there's a ceiling to the quality that we can achieve. And in fact, that isn't even our role. Our role is to maintain certain standards. And so, you know, some KPIs don't make sense because you potentially are asking people to achieve. And what is that? Are you just creating work? Are you creating targets that actually detract from the business and stop people from getting on
Yeah.
with their work because they feel like they always have to bring in something more? Or is it, you know, so KPIs can be different for different parts of your business, different teams, based on what they need to do.
100%. And back to your point around qualitative, I mean, essentially, that always says to me, it comes into the space of, you know, how do we really assess for kind of value-based kind of interviewing? And I've had a number of conversations around this in terms of, you know, companies wanting to interview based on their values, but not really having a framework that guides everybody to come to a point where they can, you know, critically assess the values of a potential, you know, potential hire. What it tends to happen is everybody understands the values and then they approach that part of the interview from their perspective. So they come away with a subjective view of that individual's alignment to the values. And then when it's discussed, it's almost discussed in 5 different ways. And you're like, yeah, it's probably not really going to help a cohesive decision. And what it ends up doing, well, you know, certainly if you're indexing highly on values and you're a small startup or scale up, it can have a really negative impact if you hire somebody that really isn't values aligned. So you do have to be. It doesn't need to be necessarily metric driven, but at least a framework so everybody can talk a common language around what they've kind of assessed. And in that way, at least, you know, there's some continuity in terms of the thinking and then the kind of final decision on it.
Well, I think that's a really important point, Glenn, because also individuals may not, and if you're talking about neurodiversity even, or your value sets may be different, and you may not demonstrate highly the values of that organization. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't be a great fit for the team or a great hire. And so it's about the leaders in the room who are having that to be able to be nuanced about how they are asking questions, and then how they have those conversations afterwards, right? That actually say, did we give them an opportunity to demonstrate to their strengths, or did we sort of just use broad brushstrokes and determine that actually they don't fit? Or with, like, to your point, if they're all focused on different values, that you're talking 5 different languages.
Yeah, exactly. It's I mean, these are the interesting challenges that certainly within kind of recruitment, talent acquisition, whatever you want to call it, the companies really should be paying attention to, because you can get some, let's say, you can get some really quick data, and you could start with just, you know, really just relying heavily on that. I mean, certainly ATS's application tracking systems these days can, you know, generate a number of reports, and you could almost think, well, that's the single view of truth in terms of our kind of overall recruitment process. Well, actually, it's not. It's your view. There are other views out there. So you know, to that point around kind of talent brand, if you don't or haven't accessed your Glassdoor kind of account from a business perspective, you could be in for either a very pleasant surprise or a very, very horrid shock. And you could dismiss it. You'd be like, well, they're anonymous posts. Well, they're anonymous posts that people will read before they think about applying for your business. So you do need to understand, you do need a baseline understanding of I guess, the platforms that you don't control but could influence, where people are talking about your business.
Right.
So Glassdoor is obviously the key one, Indeed as well, and then across social media as well. If you're not tracking what people are saying across social media, again, you could be sitting there thinking, well, why are we not getting many applications? This is an excellent role with a fantastic salary, and we've talked really eloquently about all the fantastic challenges. Could be that you've got half a dozen really negative reviews on Glassdoor. People have seen those first and thought, no chance.
People know, just like employers have data.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right, people have access to data, and especially I think in startup and scale up. If there's something going wrong culturally, and look, most scale-ups, most startups have got some leadership challenges going on. They've got, difficulties, clashes. It's high tension environment, and to think that everyone is wonderful and loving towards each other is kidding yourself, but also to think that people outside your organization don't know is also kidding yourself, because if you're in ecosystems, people know within them, and between companies and so on, within sectors. So you have to start from the position of people know, and will look and will find, and those candidates that are really serious about joining your organizations are definitely the ones who are going to be researching and finding
100%,
out as much as
100%.
possible about you, right? Digging deep. So so let's not kid anyone here. Let's be frank about what's going on.
100%. Seriously. I mean, and it kind of back to that kind of HR piece that we talked about at the top of the show. It's interesting to me now that probably some of the most consistent questions I'm getting when I'm kind of talking to individuals, introductory conversation around opportunities, is what's the back to office policy, or what's the plan look like? What's the view on hybrid working now? If there's hybrid working, is there kind of a bursary and support on that? Are you flexible about hours? These are the things that are really very important to people now. There's a number of different ways you can kind of communicate your thinking around this. But if you're, as a business, if you're generally sitting there thinking that part of our policy is sound, everybody wants to get back to the office, we've got a really lovely office, all that sort of, you're completely naive, really naive. And I'm actually surprised, but pleasantly surprised how important that is to people now. It's not just something they're asking, it's important to them. So any business, any HR function that isn't considering that, I would say definitely put that top 3 of your agenda.
You've got to have that. You've got to have that one nailed right now. And I guess the next question is also, if I am working from home, if I do have that, do you support any adjustments that I need to make at home? And what are they? Are there security elements that I've got to implement to make sure that, I'm not breaching any policies because I'm working from home, or I'm working from a cafe, or all of those things. And I've seen plenty from security people saying, Tom Langford, who I did a podcast with, talked about, he captures photos of co-working spaces where people walk away and leave their laptops open, and not even logged out, just open, and have walked away to go to the bathroom or whatever. So there's there's considerations to that kind of detail, but also, what provision is there? How does that work?
There's also links back to our point around leaders and their ability to lead in a kind of hybrid environment. I have been asked, not as much, because people tend to put it under the kind of question of, what's your kind of hybrid working policy? Some people have been very direct and said, what is X, the hiring manager's policy, or what are their view on hybrid working? So it goes beyond what's the company view. It's like, it's almost like, what's Sehaam's view on hybrid working? How has she managed her team in the last 16 months? Has that been a positive experience? What have you learned from it? So it's,
Interesting.
again, just to illustrate that point, it's super important, right?
Well, understanding that, being ready for it, having a position on it that's clear and not ambiguous.
Oh yeah, definitely.
We're working it out at the moment,
Yeah.
probably doesn't impress.
No, it gives no confidence whatsoever. Oh yeah, we're just in the process of reviewing that. Okay,
Yeah.
so you had the last 16 months and you're only now just reviewing it.
Right. And people are making decisions to join an organization that is going to be harder. They're going to have to put a lot of effort into getting to know their colleagues. You are relying on, if you haven't got any kind of guidance around it or policies around it, you're relying on individuals making that effort. So
100%.
let's make it easy for them.
Exactly. And it comes back to the
that.
point we discussed around, people that are onboarding virtually. What communities can they access once they join over and above their immediate team? Because if that team's like 3 people, okay, so there's like, I don't know, 50 odd people in the business. I'm in a team of 3. Are they the only 3 people that I get to speak to? It's kind of, how do you facilitate my networking and socializing around the business? What communities are there that I could, that align to me as a person to allow me to bring my whole person to work?
Right. And I think that relationship with your boss becomes
100%.
all the more important, right? Because you can have a buddy, you can have your teammates, but if your boss isn't modeling the kinds of behaviors that put you at ease and welcome you and support you as you land, that's a tough place to be for an employer.
Definitely.
And it always has been the case that the first few weeks of starting a job are critical and determine whether someone stays longer term. It just feels like everything's amplified, right? Everything is in
100%.
the spotlight, and so it should be. And so I think it is demanding more of employers to get this piece right,
Definitely.
to make
Definitely
themselves
indeed.
attractive.
And I just thought, kind of for some of the audience members that have kind of tuned in, they might be sitting there going, I thought it was about recruitment. Is this chat not about recruitment? This is to illustrate that recruitment isn't just a point where somebody applies, you interview and hire them.
Right.
It's far more encompassing than that. Always has been, probably more amplified now over the last 16 months. But it's a broader business discussion. And it's a broader business responsibility than perhaps just your 1, 2, or 3 kind of recruiters sitting there hurriedly looking through LinkedIn on a daily basis.
Also worth pointing out, though, Glenn, is you have, when you're thinking about someone joining, I know your perspective is longer term. What's the impact to the business, and how's this person going to grow? How's this person going to flourish in this environment? And so it isn't as simple as just finding people to fill roles.
100%.
It's you're thinking longer term about the relationship between both parties, right?
100%. Sehaam, 100%. I mean, it's, for me, it's, you're making a commitment and a promise to that individual that they will have growth potential in the business. And those are the sort of things that, people are discussing at that initial point. I'm getting asked, okay, cool. So I can see the business is growing. What does that mean for my potential career? What kind of career paths have you got? If it's a startup, people know, they're like, well, you probably haven't got any career pathways at the moment. So how do I grow? What kind of challenges, either kind of, how do I progress vertically? How do I, sort of learn more kind of horizontally? So it's an investment on both sides, and you need to be thinking, certainly really good quality recruiters need to be thinking and having conversations around, when you join, this is perhaps what the next 12 to 18 months will look like, and having those conversations with the hiring managers to make them aware that you're going to be asked this. If you don't have a credible answer, like, yeah, there's something we'll review when you join, doesn't give people a lot of confidence,
Right.
So yeah, you're absolutely right, Sehaam. I think it's a really, really valid point.
And the other thing, just before we wrap up, is the skills you need to start a business or scale are not necessarily the ones that you need when you are sort of at a stable growth. And it's important that people in that process understand it. But also there are a lot of, in scale-ups and startups, there are a lot of younger leaders who have not had the experience of leading teams, never mind running a business. And so, the needs of, the type of people that you bring in is going to change over time. If you're not sympathetic to that or understand that's going on in the background, you're going to burn through people.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I've observed it before where, like you say, kind of founders, co-founders, kind of sacrifice the leadership principles based on them driving the business forward. If I drive the business forward, that's going to be good for everybody. Unfortunately, you have a dual responsibility, a responsibility for driving that business forward and answering to perhaps your kind of investors, but equally a responsibility to the people that have chosen to join your business. So you need to invest in leading them. You need to own that, or else you're going to have high attrition.
And maybe, VCs need to speak into that more, to help founders get that balance right, because I hear a lot of founders going, well, we have to make a decision based on the target, and there's nothing about people in that. There's nothing about our culture in that, right?
Yeah, I think the more kind of bolshy VCs will be, well, that's not our concern. We're about our return on our investment. But actually, if you think about that kind of word investment, if you're really thinking holistically about that investment, you're thinking about the betterment of that investment, how you can help it kind of nurture and grow, because then you'll get a return on that investment. So therefore, investing in your founder, co-founder, now CEO, and actually aiding them around kind of being a better leader and helping to educate them in terms of the sort of things that they need to own, will only serve you well in the short to medium to long term, depending on when you wish to kind of get your return on your investment, as it were.
Yes, definitely. Wow. Well, we will do this again, I'm sure, at some point in the future. Sorry, that's not more specific than that, Glenn.
Yeah, let's keep it nice and vague.
Keep it vague. It's a good place to leave it. No, thank you. That's been brilliant. If you've got any questions or follow-up, please drop them in there, or reach out to Glenn directly. You'll find him on LinkedIn at Glenn 3Ns Networks. And if you want to come and be Glenn's guest and talk about some of these aspects in more detail as well, please reach out to him directly or drop an email to bclive@betterconversations.co.
That's super cool, Sehaam. Thank you.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Well, it's dual. It's both ways. Next week, we've got Siobhan Baker talking about services. So that is going to be
awesome.
Interesting. We'll get into that. And in the meantime, join us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Here on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and betterconversations.live. And can you remember the locations, Glenn?
In terms of
time zones?
Oh God! I was like, locations. You just said the locations.
Sorry, I meant time zones.
Well, 8 a.m. I think that's Eastern Standard Time. 2 p.m. Central European Time. 5:30 p.m. India Standard Time.
Yes.
And then 10 p.m. Australia.
East Coast.
Yeah. East Coast Standard Time.
Yeah.
Get them in the end, wouldn't we?
Yeah, we will. Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Glenn. This has been brilliant as always. And hang on. Look, I've got we've got questions. They've just come through on my thing.
Okay, cool.
Ben, early observation about people viewed as a resource. This is so deep in our culture that we don't notice how our identity and value has been reduced to the stuff we produce and consume.
100%.
Here's a question for you. Are you seeing changing perspectives from candidates, i.e. a shift in priorities from salary to money plus impact plus meaning?
Yeah, 100%.
You've spoken to that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, moreover, I'm getting asked, and getting spoken to about the mission and vision of businesses and why that's important and how that aligns to what people want to do, and why they're looking to change certain industry sectors, because in pursuit of that mission and that kind of social impact as well. So yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then we're obviously more than a worker consumer, also parents, citizens, friends, neighbors, and so on. Post-pandemic, are you seeing businesses wake up to the benefits of seeing the person as a whole? So we
I mean,
talked about it, but is it
yeah. I don't. Obviously, I don't have a as holistic view as given the sort of clients that I work with. But I think there's definitely. I think the last 16 months has kind of offered companies, hiring managers, line managers, a window into the world of their people more so. So I think they have a better appreciation of that particular employee outside of work. So I think that's been a really positive. It's been an education. Whether that's translated through to kind of how kind of recruitment practices are or recruitment's delivered as a whole, I'm not entirely sure. But I do think certainly the clients I work with, I've seen subjectively that acknowledgement, and that's more humanizing of within their approach to kind of recruitment and interviewing. So I think it's had an impact. I would say it's had a massive impact from what I can see, but it certainly had some impact for sure.
We're still figuring it out though as well, Glenn, aren't we? We're still figuring out, we're not even out of the pandemic. And we're, trying to get business back to normal, but
definitely.
We're still early days really.
Exactly. Hence that rather repetitive, vague answer. Yeah. I mean, for me, I was like, yeah, I have noticed it, but to what degree I can't really measure it. But I think it's if we're going to take something out of the last sort of 16 months as a definite positive, line managers, businesses seeing their people as people, not just employees.
Right.
That's a plus point. So back to that article being more kind of human centric and deeply investing in their employees. Hopefully that's been a catalyst for that.
Definitely. Do I just realized there's always a reason why people should never log off on the hour, because there's things I forget. We've got a phrase of the week. Are you game for that?
Oh, yeah, let's go for it. I mean, it'd be short and sweet, but so yeah, don't leave me hanging on there too long on my own.
Okay. Here goes.
Cool. Wow, phrase of the week. So I think this feeds into the sort of narrative of what Sehaam and I have been discussing, and it's really don't sacrifice the human element when you're looking to apply logic and data. Utilize logic and data to inform human people-centric decisions, and try and find that kind of balance. That's it.
Yay. You did that. I didn't leave you hanging.
Cool.
Excellent. Well, we will wrap it up there. Thank you, Glenn. Always a great conversation. So yeah, brilliant. And we will leave everyone there. See you on Tuesday next week.